Arcane Season 1 is an absolute masterpiece. It still is, to me, one of the best things Netflix has put out so far, and that says a lot, given the tons of other great stuff out on there. There's just so many things done right here, so much originality and attention to detail, so much to get invested in, all of which is much needed in the world of animation where most of it is just targeted at kids these days, or isn't quite as compelling of a watch to make as worthwhile. In the years that followed after I watched Arcane for the first time, I'd always be back on the internet to look up similar shows every once in a while. Something of a habit I may share with some of you. And it was really just to see if anything new had caught up, or if there was something old and similar enough that I'd missed previously. Well, I can say now that it was so unique of an experience to me that nothing really beats rewatching the original thing 2 or 3 times over. It's just that good. And you've probably heard this all emphasized elsewhere already, so I'm not going to repeat the same things over and over again and make this video longer than it should be. Rather, what I'll be focusing more on is the narrative approach itself, exploring what I think the show did really well, deconstructing some of the plot points to better understand and appreciate them. Basically just analyzing what I think works. So let's get right into that. Season 1 of Arcane released in November of 2021 as a Netflix original series, and a second season is set to release in just a couple of days by the time this video goes live. For the first season, the reviews from both audiences and critics alike were generally positive, as the show was receiving praise for its unique, outstanding animation style and a truly captivating story. I got around to watching it first time in mid-year of 2022 when a friend recommended, and boy did I regret not watching this one earlier when everyone else was talking about it. Now, on the topic of why I think this series is such a masterpiece, I'll be breaking down this video into 4 parts: the premise, the world building, the characters, and the plot. And the 4 fundamental elements that I think a movie or TV show should do really well with to be considered a masterpiece. Let's start with the premise. For those of you who don't know, Netflix's Arcane was based on League of Legends, which is a popular game franchise made by the company Riot Games. Almost all the major characters and the major plot points are from the games, and so the series itself is a sort of origin story to the franchise. Yes, it's canon if you were wondering. So at face value, this is a video game adaptation. A very good one at that, because now we've seen many of those, but not one done quite like this. I've never played any of the League of Legends games myself, or anything to do with Riot for that matter. Most of you watching this probably haven't either, and that's because outside the core fans of those games, Arcane managed to appeal to an entirely separate audience who were just looking for something good to watch. Heck, a whole new fan base was created, deservedly so. And that, friend, is my definition of a premise done right. A premise is like the basis or concepts with which something new is introduced. With Arcane, the gaming elements are still there. You just wouldn't know it if you didn't need to. Whether it was the cosmetics, the animation style, or the fancy artillery, or even the full-blown out combat sequences, the delivery was done so well that even after knowing it was based on a game series and rewatching the actual show more than thrice, not once do I remember watching it and thinking to myself, oh, this is based on a video game, or oh, this is like a video game. Rather, it was always more of, wow, this is a really good story, because that's just what it is, a really good story, like it's supposed to be. Arcane doesn't feel like it's animated just because it's based on a video game. The characters and the internal conflicts don't feel like they're there merely to represent the games in movie format. I don't intend to make any comparisons here because this is a masterpiece video, so I'll only talk about the masterpiece. But what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't feel like the show is trying to retell the story only in a different way. but rather that it's trying to tell its own. Arcane in its own right is a standalone masterpiece, but to be fair, a lot of that stems from the attention to detail and the high level of animation quality, none of which would be possible without the massive budgets that already successful games allowed for. So with a premise that appealed to almost everyone and left little to complain about, with a delivery this spotless, it's no surprise how memorable the series became to audiences everywhere. There are several aspects of world building that, if done well, can make anything into a masterpiece. World building has to do primarily with the setting of a story, but also loosely includes other aspects like the physical and political infrastructure the story is set in. I would go as far as to say that world building is the single most compelling element of any masterpiece, be it books, movies, or even video games, because it's basically what pushes the fuels of the story and the level of immersion audiences experience with it. A world building that is deep and filled with lore, intrigue, detailed structure, and interesting places already makes for a more immersive and compelling experience, even if the story or plot itself doesn't hold up quite as well. If it is a book, a lot of the world building would be conveyed in written descriptions alongside the main story, and it sort of tries to guide readers to paint similar pictures with their own imaginations. Whereas if it's a TV adaptation, animation in this case, it's easier to just show and tell what's happening with straightforward visuals and dialogue, both of which are aspects that Arcane's world building nails perfectly. Let me just say, the world of Arcane feels alive. It's one of the more vibrant and boldly intriguing worlds that you don't ever tire of easily. The two main settings are Zone and Piltover, or better yet, Topside and Undercity, where in Season 1, we're introduced to strong tensions that threaten to erupt in war. Piltover is portrayed as the more politically and structurally organized setting, effectively dubbed as the City of Progress, even more so with the Hextech innovations thanks to Jace's character. Now the visuals here depict a wealthy, modernized and stable place to live, thanks to the tall, immaculate buildings, the intuitive technology, and even a sense of law-abiding, what with the Enforcers Division. Zone, on the other hand, is depicted as the less privileged and shadier city, run by amok and crime warlords the likes of Silco. Buildings here are crumbling and barely holding structure. The streets are covered in grime and danger, suffering and hunger. The city's defiance and resilience is symbolized in neon art and graffiti, art that can also be interpreted as a symbol of hope in a dying city. So while not being told outwardly, it's still easy for audiences to discern the differences between Piltover and Zone for themselves, and as such, that burden has been relieved from the plot and allows the story to be told more naturally. The overall animation was done in a hybrid format, where the characters and a few buildings were done in 3D, while most of the backgrounds and cool effects like these light trails, the shadows, the rain, and the smoke were hand-painted in by traditional animators in 2D. For Tiche Animation, the studio behind Arcane chose to do it this way because it saved more time and budget and gave the final product its unique look. It still took 6 years to make anyways, but it was totally worth it because buildings, the skies, the streets, they're all brimming with life. To fully set the mood for a plot, world building in TV adaptations also utilize other aspects like musical themes and lightning style for a more fluid delivery. And with Arcane, whether it was dark and gloomy or bright and colorful, it felt like the intended mood was always in perspective. As memorable as Arcane's musical themes were, they also fit really well with the narrative. Watching through that title sequence felt so good, just seeing the raw visuals with the main characters and the artistic style with the music. And even though things like these don't exactly add anything to the story, they still form an integral part of the experience, and so we love to see it done well like this. My idea of world building done right is a world that feels like it actually exists, with its own natural flow and order, and that we the audience just have the chance to view it all through a window. And with Arcane, even though we're all aware that magic crystals, mechanical flying insects, teleportation, potions that make monsters, and whatever Heimerdinger is, even though we're well aware how none of that is real, it still just works. Now, this is where the show being animated really shows its worth. With any animation, character expressions and micro-expressions can be depicted more freely because the physical constraints of real-world actors doesn't really play here. Arcane's characters sit neatly in the middle, where expressions are exaggerated just enough to better convey emotion and thought, and not so much that it no longer feels real or human-like. And after rewatching the show a couple of times, it's easy to see how the animators pulled it off. These characters are animated so they can have bigger eyes, and light can be drawn in to highlight every detail of the face that is necessary to convey the desired emotion. And just so this doesn't get downplayed, eyes can be everything when it comes to expression. Take a look at this scene of Jinx hugging Silco after Vi had left her. There's so much emotion packed into this one scene, evolving steadily from sorrow and regret, following the deaths of Vander, Milo and Plaga, to anger and new resolve with Silco's words, almost all of it conveyed through the eyes. Let's talk about Silco for a second. Silco strikes me as a very interesting character because his origin story ties in strongly with Vander, one of my favorite characters on the show. And yet, they never saw eye to eye on anything, back when Vander was the one running things. These two fought together as brothers in rebellion against Piltover, until Vander, for unclear reasons, betrayed Silco and even almost drowned him in the river here. Silco took the ordeal as a rebirth of sorts, keeping true to his ambitions and biding his time for the perfect revenge. Now, this origin presents us with a tragic villain, befitting of the show's theme, where it's bad circumstance or a series of misfortunes that eventually led him down a dark path. And whether or not he was a good leader, a good role model, or even a good father, you'll at least have to agree that this was a properly written antagonist. Silco's character was also fully created for Arcane, and so allowed for the show to have more narrative freedom and not be overly constrained by the tons of already existing lore. On the other hand, Jinx and Vi were the main protagonists of the show. These two are presented as sisters separated in childhood for years, and when they finally reunite, they've each changed in one way or the other, more extremely on Powder's side, who went from an inferior little girl looking to prove herself to her sister, to this maniacal, knives-out killing machine who never stopped to listen to anything. Vi too had undergone some subtle changes following her time at Stillwater Prison. She too had become more bitter and less trusting, and even more hungry to throw a punch. Heck, she was used to taking a few by now. But more than anything, she lost the one thing that had kept her fighting: Powder's innocence. See, back when Vander was still around, Vi wanted things to change down in the lanes so Powder could have it better than she did. Even though they'd been through a lot, she always knew her sister had a sweet and fragile mind, and Vi wanted to protect that innocence. But now that she was back, now that Powder had already been through the worst of it and had chosen to become Jinx, she probably felt like she had failed her part as a sister. Arcane also cleverly utilizes the other characters to further portray its tragic narrative, mostly by leaving them plagued with bad decisions or overwhelming circumstances and unhappy endings. Whether it's with Jace the Inventor, the golden boy, who dabbled into politics and came to realize just how difficult it was to set things straight without resorting to violence or corruption. Or his partner Victor, who also came to realize shortly after how in their pursuit of greatness they failed to do good. Or even Marcus, whose every action caused irreparable damage to the plot, it seemed. I mean, this is the guy that got Grayson and Vander killed when he chose to deal with Soko. This is the guy that caused Vi and Powder's separation. This is also the guy that refused to let Caitlyn and Echo return the stolen gem to Hextech. Without him, the story wouldn't be what it was. He lost himself to the belief that he had to do what he did. He was a lost man, and in the end, he was never able to find his way. With the Medardas, I felt in the latter acts that Mel was genuinely concerned with doing what was right for her city, to see it progress and foster in peace, unlike her mother, who believed it was already too late to prevent an outright war with Undercity. What with where things were at. But sometimes, some things are just beyond the power of a single person, no matter how influential they can be. And can I just add that I absolutely loved the delivery with Echo's character. Echo was definitely one of the most expressive, arguably the most memorable side character. And getting to see him revealed as the leader of the Firelights, that plus the epic fight scene with Jinx in Act 3, those really stuck with me. Overall, Arcane did a really great job with its characters. To be honest, this video wouldn't end if we were to take each of them and talk about what the show did right. Even characters as seemingly unimportant as Singed or Huck were still given a lot of depth and did impact the story if you paid attention to see it. So it's really no surprise how invested and engaged audiences were with characters this memorable and diverse, just as any masterpiece would have done it. Now, this is where it all comes together, because intriguing world building and well-written characters doesn't always necessarily make for a compelling plot. Essentially, the plot is the main story in focus. It's what ties the characters together, because it's like an assemblage of their individual experiences and surrounding events that followed their actions and inactions. Again, it also helped that Arcane's unique story made it easy for viewers who weren't familiar with League of Legends to fully understand what was happening. Jinx and Vi's story was at the center of it, but we also get a subtler, rich versus poor, elite versus oppressed type of narrative. What started out as a simple burglary in Topside gone wrong was secretly the first tipping point in a sequence of events that only led to more and more suffering and loss. When Silco intervened in Vander's arrest and had Grayson killed. When Powder thought she was helping out by blowing up everything, right when Vander and the lot had almost made an escape. When Vi was kidnapped and taken away before she could go back to her sister and stay. When Marcus refused to let Caitlyn and Echo through the gates to return the stolen gem. And finally, when Jinx decided to blow up the council hall right as they decided to choose peace over war. There are so many of these tragic tipping points in the show that just beg the audience to consider how differently things might have played out if any of them had happened differently. A good plot isn't all about the action scenes and epic battles. Matter of fact, a good chunk of it is in clear dialogue and emotional complexity. And as I've said already, with how good the expression was with the characters and how relatable their interactions were, we felt every emotion as was intended, as the story intended. Another thing the story did really well with was to get its audience to invest in the characters early on. In that way, there'd be a genuine suspense build-up as the story progressed, since everyone would be eager to see what happened to their favorite characters. And even though the story is a take on tragedy, it's not all dead on humor. Like with this scene where Vi was making a face at Milo. Thanks to efficiently combining all these elements with reasonable enough pacing, plus that cliffhanger the season ended on when Powder fired her rocket, I think it's safe to say that Arcane Season 1 was truly an experience of a lifetime. If you haven't seen it yet, you're missing out on a lot. Just to reiterate all I've said so far, it had interesting world building, awesome characters, and a very gripping story. And it's not a masterpiece because it shines brightly in any one of these elements alone, but rather because it was able to beautifully blend all of that together to create a piece that very few can compare to. I had a lot of fun making this video, even though it took a while to finish. I'll leave links to all the relevant sources in the description if you want to go check that out. Just as you, I eagerly await the next season. Hopefully it's just as good. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And don't forget to drop a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe, share, I'd appreciate that. And as always, thanks for watching. Catch you later.